Hello, gentle marketers. Welcome to season number 5, episode number 35 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm and changing it to a gentler approach, one that is based on empathy and kindness. I'm Sarah Croce. I'm the host on this show. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. If you're a regular, thanks so much for your continued support. You know that you're in the right place if you're a heart-centered entrepreneur or change maker who is looking for a better way to market your business. Or you are an entrepreneur who's simply tired of the traditional, hypey marketing model and are ready for a paradigm shift. You might also be a marketing impact pioneer working for an organization who does business for good. Today's episode falls under the P of passion of the Gentle Marketing Mandala. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can download your one-page marketing plan that comes with 7 days of emails to fill out your 7 Ps at sarahsanacroce.com/one page, the number 1 page. When I created the Gentle Marketing Mandala and renamed the 7 Ps of marketing, I hesitated between the words passion and purpose. So that's the first P. In the end, I went with passion because I found that purpose was sometimes a bit intimidating for entrepreneurs. We were told to, come up with our purpose, and that was sometimes a bit intimidating. But my guest today, Jeff Fromm, has made purpose his area of expertise. He's the author of The Purpose Advantage, and after hearing him speak about this book on Jeffrey Shaw's podcast, I asked him if he would come on to my show and talk to us about it as well. So here's Jeff's official bio. As the Millennial and Gen Z marketing guy, Jeff Fromm has traveled the world sharing insights on how youth culture is impacting the marketplace, as well as the consumer behaviors of every generation. He led the first public study of Millennials in 2010 through a partnership with the Boston Consulting Group. That work informed his first book, Marketing to Millennials. He has since co-authored 3 more, Millennials with Kids, Marketing to Gen Z, and The Purpose Advantage. He also is a regular contributor to Forbes. Jeff earned an economics degree with an emphasis in marketing from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and attended the London School of Economics. He is the president at Futurecast, a forward-thinking trends consultancy, and a partner at Barkley, a creative idea company. While others may talk about trends, Jeff and his partners merge such insights to create marketing and innovation best practices. These applications are the basis of Jeff's presentations. With years of brand marketing consulting experience, his humorous stories and provocative new strategy paradigms are supported by hard research and real client profit growth. So on today's episode, we talk about purpose, Jeff's definition of the modern consumer mindset, which is similar to my conscious client, as well as the 17 SDGs, which stands for Sustainable Development Goals that are set forth by the United Nations. I think you'll find his research in our conversation very interesting. So without further ado, here's my interview with Jeff Fromm. Hi, Jeff. So good to speak to you. I'm excited for our conversation.
Likewise.
Wonderful. So I reached out to you. We're recording this in the middle of the Corona crisis, and I reached out to you before that because I heard you on Jeffrey Shaw's podcast and then read your book, The Purpose Advantage, and that's really what I want to talk about today, because in my Gentle Marketing program, we also talk a lot about purpose and passion, and what I feel like that's where we need to start is maybe by you addressing this idea of purpose and how you define it in your book and just how you define it when you talk about it.
Sure. Well, thank you. Purpose and purpose advantage are a little different. Purpose means different things to different people. Some people think of it as your why many times I'll talk to CEOs who have a really vibrant mission, and the mission and the purpose will be similar. Purpose advantage, I define very clearly as companies that have functional, emotional, and societal benefits, and they use purpose and sustainability as a verb. So they don't talk about things, they do. Now that's metaphorically, because I know purpose and sustainability aren't a verb, but metaphorically you see them take brand actions. In terms of the functional, emotional, societal benefits, for larger organizations, I encourage them to lean to the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are briefly outlined in the book.
I'll come back to those because I think those are really important to explain. So let's just put an anchor there and come back to those. Thank you.
Sure. For smaller organizations, I think you have to think about what's true about your brand in terms of what makes it great and what's important to the needs of the local community. So societal can be defined to some extent based on, if you're a solopreneur, societal is your local market based on the business you serve. And if you're a bigger company, then I think, it's always smart for larger brands to lie to, go to the societal sort of as defined by the United Nations, because then we're talking about larger needs. And many of those are climate based, but there are many that are non-climate based. So, but it's functional benefits, it's emotional benefits, it's societal benefits, and it's using purpose and sustainability as a verb. If you don't have strong functional and emotional benefits, you can have the best sustainability ideas in the world. Consumers aren't going to buy your product. The reality is, though, when we look at a lot of services and a lot of products, the gap between product A and B can be very small. Both companies make amazing things, and the price difference can be very small. And so then companies that have a strong purpose and sustainability thread have that extra edge, both with internal stakeholders, employees, and external stakeholders, customers or consumers. And that's why it's so important, because it's one of the things that can separate how I feel about a company. I don't know that Patagonia makes products that are that unique from other amazing products, but I feel better about that brand based on their values. Or many US people are not that familiar with Tony's Chocolonely, a fast-growing European company, but they're trying to end slavery in West Africa. So assuming you like the flavor of their chocolate, which is very important, because if you don't, you're not going to buy it. And assuming it's priced fairly, again, only, consumers will only pay a small premium. Then do you want this chocolate, which has a mission to end slavery, because people picking cacao beans in West Africa need to be paid, or do you want to buy from another chocolate company? And that's where we get into the, notion of societal benefit.
In your previous book, it was called Marketing to Millennials, right? And I assume you did a lot of research, in this market that is the millennials. And is that research then that led you to this realization of the importance of purpose?
Yes. In fact, I'd love to tell you the quick backstory. So in 2010, like probably many of your listeners, I used Google. And I was trying to find information on millennials and Gen Y, and I was trying to search different ways to look for trends among consumers. And, the first search was a fail. I got a bunch of bad information back, and the next and the next. And at some point, I'd done dozens of searches using different combinations of words. And every time I got information that was really low value. And so I started to scratch my head. I'm frustrated at this point. Either the search I'm doing just doesn't generate anything of value, or this topic has never been done. And then I realized nobody had done the topic. Called a friend of a friend who's the global head of insights and research for the Boston Consulting Group. Never had met the person. And she said, what are you thinking? And I said, well, I want to do this big research study on millennials. Now this is 2010, and I've done this exhaustive Google search, and I can't find any fact-based information. No one's ever published a study on millennials as consumers. Or at least it's not in Google. And by the way, I don't have any money, so would you pay for half of it? So she takes a deep breath, and it's quiet for a moment, that kind of awkward pause. And she says, the Boston Consulting Group is not in the business of paying for other people's research. And I said, of course, I know that. And she said, well, I'll think about it and I'll get back to you, which of course is the code, right? It's the globally known code. I'll think about it. I'll get back to you as the code for, I don't think I'm going to be calling you back,
I'll
right?
never call you again. Yes.
Yeah. It's like, I'd like to go out for coffee with you. Do you want to go? Let me think about it. I'll call you back. Okay. So she called back a week later and she said, you know what? You're right. Nobody's ever studied and published it. We've run our own searches. We can't find anything of value. And we think it's a really big deal. So we'll give you half the money for your project and I'll personally work on it with you.
Wow.
And so then one thing led to another. We published the research in 2011. Started a conference on marketing to millennials at the time. And then I wrote a book called Marketing to Millennials in 2013. Since then, I've done a lot of research and I've written 4 books on millennials, millennials with children, and Gen Z or Gen Z, depending on what part of the world you're in. And all of these books have been informed by research, and the Purpose Advantage, the new book, is a little more workshop style than research book. It's more stories and less, a little less on the hard data because there's already been a fair amount of data published.
Right.
But what we found is consumers, and particularly consumers under the age of 40, but consumers generally, when things converge, when the quality and the price and availability of products and services are similar, then values matter a lot. Mm-hmm. And then the values piece gets back to that whole societal benefit, that definition of purpose advantage. And so many companies today, think about this, and we're trying to show people how to act on it, how to make this a verb in your business. So that's sort of the backstory. And yes, there's a lot of research that suggests that, again, if you can have an advantage in flavor or a unique design or faster processing speeds because you have built a microchip that processes faster, then you have an advantage, and it's real, and sustainability will matter less. And if your price is more than 10% less than your competitors and you compete on low price, then price will become more important. But if you can't create a price gap that's greater than 10% on a consistent basis, and you can't have chips that process faster on a consistent basis, or whatever you make, right? Better flavored chocolates, then at the end of the day, the values are going to become really important. And that's why we see so many of these high performing, smaller, mid-sized brands, relatively speaking, winning. Not that Tony's Chocolonely is tiny, not that Patagonia is tiny, but they're not the behemoths, right?
Compared to the huge companies, yeah.
Right, they're the upstarts, and they don't do it through traditional forms of advertising so much. They do it through brand action.
Yeah. So that word or definition, values, is really important. You also talk about in the first framework of the book, you use the term worldview, which I also often use. And especially for solopreneurs, our worldview is very related often to our purpose. How do you differentiate between worldview and values, or are they one and the same?
I don't know that I have a great answer. I mean, worldview tends to be how we frame up in the back half of the book, how to think about setting your compass, right? And how to think about starting the planning process. But I would say worldview is the way into the societal need question. So
what I would say is almost like your values or your worldview is made up of your values.
I think that's a better way to even say what I said. Yeah.
Right.
So the question
that leads to the next step.
Yeah. The question is, to me, what is it's a complex question, but I'll give you the shorter answer here. First, you want to look at the history of the brand, if you have it, right? And like William Lever, who started Unilever, which is a European brand, he was solving a societal need around basic hygiene, a topic that's very big in COVID-19, right? Basic hygiene. And so if I were building out from that, even though the company is over 150 years old, I want to look at the history of the company. If I'm a younger, smaller company, and there's no historic backstory to the origin, okay, if there's not an origin story, then I simply want to look at what is my product or service doing today in terms of solving a societal need, and what do I think it could have the potential to do in Tomorrowland, and then what's my path from today to Tomorrowland. But if I have an older company with the kind of history that a Unilever does, then I want to look back and make ideally part of the origin story part of the Tomorrowland story.
Right. Yeah, and that applies to big companies, and it definitely applies to smaller companies where the owner is much more important, maybe, or at least more present than the owner of a giant company. So bringing in the origin story, we talk a lot about the about page on your website, right? That's where your origin story is based, and that's where you bring in your worldview and your values. So yeah, very, very relevant. Let's go back to the consumers. So what you found out about the millennials, and you call it in your book, you talk about the modern consumer. I talk about the conscious client, so very similar. So tell me what you found out about this modern consumer.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind with the modern consumer is they're discerning, not disloyal. One of the big myths we hear frequently about today's consumer is that they're disloyal. And it's unfortunate people think that, because what's true is they're discerning, not disloyal. And they'll trade up to strong brands and use them and pay a premium for them. And they'll trade down when there's weak brands. And I think one of the best examples of that is the laundry detergent aisle, which is probably the sort of most boring aisle in the grocery store, if you will. And you have the largest company on the planet called Tide, and it's recognized globally. In fact, when I'm speaking to audiences, I'll often say I'm in the detergent aisle and I'm looking at an orange bottle. What bottle am I looking at? I can't remember the name, and people all shout out Tide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And yet we have another company in the aisle that people don't know that well, and it's called Seventh Generation, and it charges an extra $1 a bottle at shelf, which is about 10% premium. And so even though they're a lesser known brand, not recognized and more expensive, they're growing rapidly, while Tide is losing share rapidly. So what's going on? One company has a purpose advantage, one doesn't. It's really that simple. Like, consumers feel better about themselves as a human and protect the planet for $1.
Right.
And it's not that Tide's a bad brand. It's that Tide was built in a different era.
There's another connection with the consumer, right?
It was built in the industrial complex era where people heated, beated, and treated products and then sold them to people through mass advertising.
Right.
And Seventh Generation was built in a different era where people put values and quality product together. Seventh Generation product is no better, except that it's less harmful. And for $1, I'll do it.
Right.
So that's a simple example, but I'm giving you a simple example in like the most boring category on the planet.
So in the book, you go through these different things that make up the modern consumer mindset. So there's social circle, self, innovative, trusted, accessible, and purpose. I want to talk about the self.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Why is the self so important for the modern consumer?
Sure. So self is very much rooted in the research we did, and it's a large-scale quantitative study around emotional connections. And emotional connections are what drive frequency and loyalty for consumers. And the simple version of it is, we make thousands of decisions every day. You do, I do, and the people listening to this do. And they made a decision to listen. And those decisions are usually more emotional than rational. People don't walk down the grocery store aisle with a price per ounce of every yogurt in the store and a flavor score for every yogurt in the store and a sustainability score for every yogurt in the store, and then make a decision based on calculating using an algorithm. They quickly make a decision, and most people lean toward those emotional decisions. And so self captured that. And what we found again and again is the price elasticity companies have is related to emotional connection. Whether that's the emotional connection I have to my CPA or to the yogurt I prefer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was through a large study we did.
So interesting. Also, what I talk about is the beauty of the product, and I first read about that in Daniel H. Pink's A Whole New Mind. Um, this idea that today there's much more focus on not just the functional side of a product or service, but also on again, it's the emotional connection and the way it presents. That beauty is much more important today, and that is so true also when you look at these products that are kind of the alternative and not the big brand. They're often more beautiful than the main big brand. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah. I
That
mean, people are more affluent as a society, and then people's values evolve. Although I would say today people spend less time maybe thinking about the apparel side of that beauty category and more about experiences. But yes, if I look at the category as a whole, it's probably a bigger category today than it was then.
Yeah, and it's not so much the aesthetic beauty, it's more the beauty of the experience. And I think you're right, because there's obviously different definitions, but the whole experience needs to be beautiful and not just fact based and kind of functional. So if you look just at these different bottles of detergents, one is orange and in your face, and let's be honest, not very beautiful, and the other one is kind of like discreet and somehow more beautiful, I think. So yeah, I find that interesting as well. Let's go back to those 17 sustainable development goals. So can you tell my audience, if they've never heard about this, what that is and how it kind of weaves in with your work?
Sure. I mean, the Sustainable Development Goals is a piece of work that was done by the United Nations to identify 17 global opportunities to make the world a significantly better place. And what's interesting about it is it allows us to tackle macro things. Some are climate related, and some are more like giving women equal footing, because that helps in so many underdeveloped countries, and even in developed countries where women aren't earning the same wages. So the development goals lay out a path, particularly for larger brands, to think about their responsibility.
Right. Yeah. And so how does that relate with, for example, I'm thinking about your exercise with the finding the purpose. You prompt this question, well, where does this tie in with your values? What's your company's values? How do they relate with the 17 sustainable development goals, right? That's one of the exercises, I think.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the exercises are meant to stimulate thinking at a broad level in the book. The reason we put the exercises in is because we run workshops with companies. And in the workshop, what you're trying to do is move people from where they are today to where they would like to end up through a process where you get some shared buy-in. And rather than debate things, part of the reason for using the development goals is it's a global standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a global standard.
Right.
And I think the important thing to understand for most companies is perfect is the enemy. Most companies aren't going to get to perfect. The idea is to focus on improvement and creating values from an inside out basis that will be, helpful to you as you pull your team together and create an empathetic, hardworking culture, whether you have a couple of employees or hundreds of employees, right? The team is going to be more powerful than any one person. And so I think that's the big thing, is this workshop and the workshops in the book so that people can do it themselves. Obviously, we do it for many mid-size and larger companies will come in and actually run the workshop. But it's to help think about unlocking that potential.
Yeah. And I'll link to the 17 SDGs as well, because I think just also as solopreneurs, it helps us to think about our purpose or passion. When we see those different goals, maybe I am really passionate about climate change, or maybe I'm more passionate about equality, or there's these different themes that we can think of as, what do we care about? What's our worldview? What do we care about in the world, and how can we now bring those different themes into our business and into our marketing.
Yeah, and I think it's important. It's important that you personally care about it, but as you get to a larger company, it's also important that it be part of your brand sort of editorial authority, right?
It definitely, and actually that brings me to the last page of your book. It's the image of a mirror, and so you prompt this question: what's your personal purpose? Because you wrote the book obviously for bigger companies, and so there's this there's the person, the individual who reads the book, and then there's the company that they work for. And in my case, in the audience, they're mainly entrepreneurs who probably don't have a big business. And so it's our personal purpose that also somehow becomes the company's purpose. But in a bigger company, indeed, you have the company purpose and then your personal purpose, which is, I think, also important to think about, right?
It is, and so that's why I made the distinction. I think in a smaller company that it should reflect probably your personal more closely, but in a bigger company, you have to be careful that it's when we run that workshop, we try to make sure it's sort of related to the origin story if it can be, and because you want to make sure that it really can span across a lot of stakeholders.
Yeah, of course.
And each person has a different business.
Right.
And ideally, the societal benefit actually fuels increased profits. Like profits aren't a bad thing.
Right.
Because like in my 7th generation example I shared with you earlier, the extra $1 a bottle generates profits. That profit goes back to innovation reinvestment to make products that are going to use less fossil fuels and be safer on the environment. So, and that can be done more efficiently by the company than an individual consumer in their home lab, making their own cleaning products. So it's important to understand, and I use in the book, sort of the whole notion of a flywheel. And I think that's really important for companies.
I like that you brought up profits because as heart-centered entrepreneurs, we are often so much into giving, and the purpose becomes almost more important than the profit. And I like that you highlight this fact. Well, both are equally important, and in fact, on the B Corp website, certified, they define themselves like this: certified B corporations are a new kind of business that balances purpose and profit. So both are equally important. If you don't make profit, well, you're not really running a business, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, clearly, unless your business is a nonprofit, but yes, that's clearly the case, but I think the big change that I would think about is today it's not enough to make, and the way I'd frame it, it's not enough to make a profit. It's also important to give back. You have to do both.
It's that balance between the two, yeah, where before a business was only defined by profit, like purpose
Correct.
was not even in the conversation. And so, yeah, that's what's new really with these modern consumers. That's what they're looking for. Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much for your time and sharing your knowledge. Before you let people know where they can find you, I want to ask one last question. In these strange times, what are you grateful for today, this week, this month, Jeff?
Well, I'm grateful for my family and my being healthy. We're all under quarantine right now, but at this point, everyone's healthy. Not all loving being quarantined, but we're all healthy. And hopefully we can get past the pandemic and to a better place for everyone soon.
Yeah, thank you. We're recording this on March 19th, and hopefully by the time we air this episode, things are definitely, already on the other side, or at least looking more hopeful than right now. So yeah, please do share where people can find you, and obviously, again, a plug for your book, The Purpose
Sure.
Advantage. Go ahead and share your website.
My personal site is jefffromm.com. That's JEFFFROMM. You can easily find me on LinkedIn, or my email's jfromm, Jfromm at Barkley US. That's BARKLEYUS.com. And the book is easily found on Amazon, and hopefully people will enjoy it and find it helpful.
Yeah, I really found it so helpful to have the exercises right there, right? So that you can really just organize your own workshop. So thanks so much for sharing these resources.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on the show, and hopefully we're all in a better time in a few weeks.
Thanks so much for taking the time, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, take care.
Make sure you pick up a copy of Jeff's book. It's called The Purpose Advantage and can be found wherever books are sold. I hope you'll join me on this journey to a kinder marketing paradigm. Please invite your friends to join us by sharing this podcast or the Gentle Business Manifesto with them. Both can be found at thegentlebusinessrevolution.com. Let's be the change we want to see in the world.